Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's continue with our content. In this content, I'll be covering on classes and objects. Okay, we'll be looking at how what are objects and what is reference variable, what is that, and then how to use and how to create and use objects. Okay, I've mentioned to you just now that classes are the description. Okay, it's basically it is actually the codes that you have written, right? And whereby objects is created from the class. When you written the class, you run the class, right? So you'll be getting the objects of the class, and sometimes we call it instance of classes. Okay. Okay. When you are writing your code, you are basically doing this. You are writing user-defined classes. You define the class by yourself. You write it by yourself. And at the same time, when you run the code, sometimes you use some of the libraries, right? You import certain of the library. Okay, for example, the scanner to get inputs, random classes, and so on. Okay, that is called predefined classes. So that is provided by Java. The one that written by you, we call it as user-defined classes. Okay, normally for classes, you will begin it with a capital letter. Okay, begin with an alphabet. You start it with an alphabet, and normally it start with a capital letter. Can contain letter, digits, underscore, or dollar sign. Okay, you cannot use reserved words in Java. Okay. How to create your class, Java class. Okay, I think you know this already. What you did is you use class, you write the class. This one here, public and so on. Okay, it can be changed. This is called accessibility level. It can either be public, private, protected. Okay, that can be changed. And then you write your class name here. Okay, class name here can be anything, starting with a letter, a capital letter. Okay, and you open the curly braces and close it. Alright, so whatever that you write is inside this area here. Okay, you can either put it the variable and also the method. Okay. Okay, inside the class, okay, you can define the variable and also you can define the method. You can have more than one for both. Okay, and for variable, you can have the data type. Okay, data type is the for example, you want to put name. Data type is string. Access level is either private, public, or you sometimes you can leave it blank. Right? The same goes to here. It's for method. Here you can write the method name, and then you can specify the parameter that it use. Okay, and then the return type. Okay, whether this method return any value or not. If it does not return anything, you write it void, and then access level is the same as now. It's either public, private, protected, or default. Okay, as this is a method, it has curly braces here, open and ending, and then you can write whatever code that is related to this method. Okay, in this example, for example, we have a class called student. Okay, this is a visual representation of the class, which is a class diagram. So this class diagram shows that there are two methods here, which both are private. Okay, you look at the minus sign, and both are actually string. Okay, and it has two methods here. The first one is called student. Okay, this method name is the same as the class. When you see this is showing that this is a constructor. Okay, constructor is actually a type of method, but it is used to provide initial value for the variable. For example, in this case, we have metric number and student name, right? Sorry, this is name. Okay, some corrections here. Okay. So we have two variables here. So we use constructor to provide initial value to these two variables. And then in this example, there is another method called calculate fees. This calculate fees does not have any parameter, but it depends on you. Maybe later, if you write your own method, you want to put parameter, you can include it here. And then the return value is double. How do I know it's double? So check here, return fees. Fees is actually a double, so it's return double. Okay, and in this case, it's a public method. See, it's positive sign, so it's a public method. So basically, these are an example of a student class. Okay, yeah. Now we move on to, now that you have a class, you can actually, when you run it, you can create objects. Okay, so objects can contain the way that you give name to an object. You can have letters, digits, numbers, underscores, and dollar sign. Cannot use reserved word, and recommended to begin with an alphabet and a small letter. Okay, so that's the best practice in giving name to the object. Let's start with a small letter. Okay, how can you declare an object reference variable? Okay, when you want to create an object, you need to declare the name. Okay, you can say this is a name. Okay, for example, we have a student class just now, right? So you want to create object for student, so you write student in front, and then this can be whatever name that you want to give to the object. Okay, it can be student 1, student 2, S1, S2, but better to give a name that is meaningful and start with a small letter. You can have numbers that follow. Okay, so once we have created the reference name, we can create the object. Okay, how can you do that? Okay, for example, just now you use student 1, right? Student 1 equal, add the word new here. Okay, new. Student is referring to the class that we want to create object for, and this is whatever parameter that is supported by the controller. Okay, so don't forget to put new and follow by the class that we want to create the object for. Okay, so you can actually combine the two steps just now that I've shown by combining both. Okay, rather than having in two lines, you can put one in a one line straight away. For example, we have student 1 of type student. We want to create an object for student. Okay, see this one must be the same. So if you're student, it should be student. And don't forget to add the word new here. New is actually keyword in Java. And whatever in here is actually the value that you want to give to the variable. In our case, or for student case, there is a metric number and name, right? So these are the initial value that you want to give to name and metric for this object student 1. Okay, right. So once you have created an object, you can actually use the attribute and method inside the object. Okay, so you normally use dot here. Okay, reference name is whatever that you have created just now, student 1, student 2. Member objects can either be the variable, the attributes, or the methods. Let's have a look. For example, uh, let's say if you want to access the name of the student, you use student 1. Student 1 is the reference name that we have created, dot name. Okay, or you can do like this. You want to print something, student 1 dot metric number. Okay, this is an example of how you can access the attributes via the inside the object. Okay, you can also call, just now what you have seen is you use the attributes in the object. So this one is another way, but to access the method. Remember in the student class we have calculate fees method. So how can you use it? Okay, so student 1 is referring to the object reference name that we have created just now, right? So you put dot here and then whatever method that you want to use. But this method name must exist in the student class. You cannot simply write something that is not there in the class. Okay. So you can actually use it. For example, student 1 calculate fees. If you still remember, this method return value double, meaning that after you finish executing this method, it will give you a value. A value, the type is double, it's a number. Okay, so that number can be passed to a variable. In this case, we give a name of this number. And see, because the return value is double, so it must have a double value. Okay, so how can I can summarize everything by putting these two things together? Okay, this is the student class that we have just now. Okay, I changed the name, the metric name a bit, the name for the variable for the attribute name. Okay, just now we see that there are two variable metric name, metric number name, and both are actually private. And then we have a constructor. Remember, constructor is actually a method that gives value, initial value to the attributes. So in our case, we have metric number name. So metric number name, sorry, this should be a small letter here. And it's passing to parameter. This is the value that we will give our metric number. Okay, this is the initial value for metric number. Okay, so we have constructor, and then we have the second one, which is another method which is called calculate fees. The type is it return a double value and it's a public. Okay, so this is the class that we have seen just now. Okay, how can you create the object? Okay, you can create another class. In our case here, this is another class which is called test student. It's another class. You can open a new file for Java and type like this, and then you have public static void main because you want to run it. Okay, and here you create the reference name for the object. Okay, so in our case we want to create student object, so it should be student should use the same name like the one defined in the class. Then this is the variable name that we want to use, and then this one is Abdullah and 60812 is actually referring to this, to the constructor. Okay, if the constructor has three parameter, you should have three parameter here as well. Okay, so this line is actually showing how you can create an object. Okay, the second one here that follow, you use student one. Okay, the same student one dot calculate fees. So, right now this code is allowing me to use this method, calculate fees. Okay, calculate fees. So when this is done, okay, my code, when the Java compiler is at this line of code, it will go inside this method. Okay, calculate fees, do an operation here. So the fees is 1,800, right? So it will return the value of 1,800 here, and it will pass it to fees. Okay, so when you print it out, it will print out fees is 1,800. Okay, that's how you can use or create objects. Okay, you can actually add more than one object here. Maybe you can have student 2, student 3, and so on and so forth. Right? See, I use dot here. Dot is actually a way of the object accessing inside the class or another objects. Okay, now that you have seen variable, basically variable or attributes can be defined either as primitive type or reference type, variable, reference variable. Okay, primitive type is the one that you've been using, integer, float, double, string. String is not integer, float, and double. Okay, so it says here primitive variable contains the value itself. Okay, whereby there is another type which is called reference variable. Okay, objects are called reference data type because the content of the variable are the addresses that refer to memory location where the objects are actually stored. Okay, what that means is that it means here. Okay, there are two types. Primitive and reference. Primitive, if you let's say integer x equal to 45 in your memory, okay, in the space provided for x, the value is there 45. Whereas for reference, so it's referring to the objects that we created just now. Okay, for example, any objects. So let's say using the same example just now, student 1. Okay, you are creating an object called student 1, the type is student. Then you create an object. Okay, so student 1 equal new student Ali S111. Okay, what happened here in student 1 is not storing the object that we just created here. What it has here is actually the address of the objects. The object is actually somewhere else. Okay, in this case, the location for that student 1 is actually here. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is actually address in your an example of address in your memory. So at the location of 1, 2, 3, 4, so you have the object created in here. Okay, so that's slightly different. If you use integer, double, float, okay, the variable is the value is stored at the memory space, whereby here it actually storing the address of the objects where the object is somewhere. Okay, for example, when you type student 1, the compiler actually created a space for student 1, but it's showing nothing. Okay, nothing is actually allocated yet. So when the compiler read the second line, student 1 equal new student, and there's a value. So what it does is that student 1 now, rather than pointing to nothing now, it's actually pointing to an object. Okay, so student 1 is actually here in this location, but in here it's not, it's only showing the location of the objects, right? So this is this information is just to tell you when you write the code what is actually happening in the memory. Okay, for example, another example, you have student 1 of type student, and then you create student 1 equal new student Ahmad S111. So for the first time, this is created. Okay, student 1. And then the third line, when you do student 1 equal to new student city. So because this is it's showing references, so rather than showing to Ahmad, now it's actually showing to a different location for city. So when this happened, Ahmad object student is already gone already. You cannot retrieve it. So if you want to create object for student, for Ahmad, make student 1. If you want to create another object for city, make it student 2. So doing that will help you to maintain what you want rather than removing